Welcome back to the Mackem in the Middle podcast. Deadline day was yesterday. It was a very busy day for everyone, and I'm sure everyone had a very late night. Some big news earlier in the week as well, which we'll get onto. Plenty to talk about. Joined by Ethan, Michael, and James for a short while. First and foremost, James, I'm sure transfer deadline day is one day you probably dread.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a nightmare. So I work Sunday to Thursday. So I started work at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning, finished at 5, and then had to jump back on because obviously Lee Johnson got the sack.
Yeah.
Phil Smith was eating pizza and drinking pints in the ISIS and Sunday Club without a laptop, so he couldn't do anything. And our other writer Joe was busy playing football, so that was interesting. So I worked a lot of hours on Sunday. And then obviously there was a fair bit to do yesterday, but I managed to get finished early and sort of watch it all develop. And actually, I was saying this to Michael before we came on the pod. I managed to fall asleep at about 11:30 because I was in work, and again it's 7 this morning at the Sunderland Echo. So I sort of woke up and screamed like a little girl when I saw it. It was absolutely excellent. And yeah, what a day on Sunderland Twitter as well. What a night on Sunderland Twitter. Absolutely phenomenal themes. I'm sure we'll get onto that. But yeah, can't stop smiling this morning.
Yeah. And I think, Michael, even Sunderland tweeted it, that Sunderland Twitter, there's nothing better. There's nothing similar. It is quite insane when it goes like that.
Yes, it is. I'm just smirking about everything. Obviously, we'll get onto the wee Philly stuff later, but it just blew up, didn't it? Everything blew up on Sunderland Twitter, and it's just one of those things where
I think there was at one point where Philly was number 2 trending in the UK. So
did he get to number 1 at any point?
Couldn't tell you that one, but I think it was definitely number 2 at one point.
Oh, number 2 is still incredible for him. Well, I think the best quote, I think it was one of you said before he came on. I think someone said on Twitter that Wee Philly deserves to win the award for best investigative journalist or something like that. It's just stuff like that cracks me up every time. Obviously, I was at work last night, yesterday evening, so I came back. I was and I think we said it in the group chat ourselves, especially with the whole Defoe thing. We'll get onto it later, I know, but I wasn't expecting any signings to be announced while the under-23s game was getting commentated on. But obviously, even by Sunderland standards, they left it very, very late. I think it was announced at midnight, 1 o'clock, and then Defoe not long after that. But yeah. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? And I think someone else said on social media, and it's such an accurate quote, we can go from arguably the worst result in our history on Saturday and feeling really, really miserable, and rightly so, to now all of a sudden feeling high as a kite. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, I screamed like a big fanboy when Defoe signed, like James probably did, and I've just ruined my street credibility by saying that.
Michael, can you imagine like if Sunderland actually won something? I mean, we've essentially signed a 39-year-old.
That's what I was saying on Twitter. If this is after a 6-0 defeat, you've just sacked your manager. We've just signed a near 40-year-old striker. Can you imagine if we get promoted this season?
It's crackers like signing a couple on deadline day. It's like it's absolutely mad. And I mean this with the greatest respect in the world, because I know we Philly a little bit as well. But you've got a lunatic outside the academy and a few lunatics at like the early hours of the morning waiting to get a glimpse of a striker. I mean, that's the power of football. And can you imagine if we actually won a cup one day or something? It would be
well, exactly. I mean, that's the power of fan media, isn't it? Whether it's podcasts or YouTube channels, it's starting to grow in a bit more in recognition now. And that was just one those clips with Philly outside the academy was just one of the most bonkers things I've ever seen. He's a far braver man than I'll ever be.
Absolutely, and I honestly, like, speaking from somebody who's in the traditional like print media now, I think the whole fan TV stuff is excellent because it's given fans a voice. It's good entertainment, and yeah, I mean, the memes
it's never boring, James. Is it?
Worth it. The memes alone are worth it, and it's credit as well to a great group of lads involved in fan TV as well. Yourself, Michael, Jake Kirkbride, Dodsey as well, Conrad, Dino as well. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but those lot of that set of people do hours and hours of streams for essentially nothing, just because they're passionate about the club. So they completely deserve that moment. I was on the stream earlier with Jake and Dodsey for about 20 minutes, but they were on the stream for like 7 hours or something. So it's great for them to get that payoff and fair play. And as I say, the memes this morning and the crack has just been
without doubt.
And that's what
media things. It's like the podcasts, everything. Everyone that and yourself, obviously, James. I know you work in the print side of things, but you're still as much of a fan as anybody. Although it's I don't know how you manage to keep a professional head with watching. But
great difficulty.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just the fact that we're all passionate, and whatever our opinions, we all want the same thing. We all want to get out of this not very good league. I was going to think of a swear word there, but I'll try and be professional. But like you said earlier, though, like imagine what it would be if we get promoted. If we went up this season, imagine. All I'll say is rest in peace, everybody's livers in Sunderland.
I think one phrase that suits Sunderland very well, Ethan, is heart in the mouth. And I think that goes for games and certainly for transfer windows. Obviously, there was rumours all of Sunday, starting from about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. People refreshing their Twitter, at every hour. Nothing was happening. Bang on 6 o'clock, everyone was convinced Defoe was signing. Get a notification from Sunderland, doing a 23 lineup. And then, it turns to half 12, 11, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we finally announce players. It was a very interesting day yesterday.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's never easy ride, or it's never quiet being a Sunderland fan, especially on deadline day. But I think it just goes to show, like as we were saying earlier, how excited all the fans were. That, like, considering it was gone midnight when the announcement was made, I think it goes to show that despite we are in League One, there's still thousands, tens of thousands of fans so dedicated to Sunderland that it just, despite the fact that we've just sacked our manager and just been trounced 6-0 off Bolton, that the excitement and the buzz around the ground is probably the best we've felt all season. So I think hopefully that we can kick on from here now.
Yeah. Well, earlier in the week, I say earlier in the week, James, it was literally 2 days ago now, the big bombshell dropped that Johnson had been sacked. It was... People will have different opinions on it. Do I think he should have been sacked? No. Do I think after a 6-0 defeat, a manager is warranted to be sacked? Yes. But the timing of it was very strange.
Yeah, it was. It came as a bit of a surprise. I've said repeatedly that it's not a shock for a manager to get sacked after a 6-0 defeat, but given the timing of it, the deadline day coming up, given we've recruited for a certain style, a certain model, it did come as a bit of a shock. I honestly thought he was going to get to the end of the season just to break this cycle of sacking managers halfway through, which we've done for a long time. I think Steve Bruce is the last manager to complete 2 consecutive seasons as Sunderland boss, which is an absolutely crazy statistic. That's a decade or so ago. So I was surprised in that regard. I think it signals that the priority this season is getting out of this league, and they didn't think that was going to happen under Johnson. It was interesting to hear Gordon Armstrong speak last night about potential murmurs of discontent in the dressing room. Not really sure what's gone on there, but you never know. But I think I'm more comfortable with this sacking given the structure of the club now. So the club are clearly recruiting with players in mind, types of players in mind, the style that they want to play. And the head coach then sort of becomes not inconsequential, but he should be able to be sort of lifted out and lifted in. He's still a very important part of the setup, obviously, because, he's the boss. But I think the setup around with Speakman and the transfer team and the type of player Sunderland want to get, they've identified the type of football that they want to play, and the model of recruitment, it's all there. So, yeah, it was a bit of a shock, but having thought about it, it makes sense in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's still very, very tough to explain when you're heading into deadline day, because of course players would have wanted to know who the boss was going to be and who they're working under. It doesn't appear like they've got anybody in mind immediately. It seems that he's been sacked. The priority that has then been deadline day, finalising the 2 last deals and the outgoings as well.
Yeah.
And then thought today turns towards the head coach. I do think it will be a head coach type of person. It won't be a manager. I said this on Sunderland Fan TV last night before it all kicked off that that the name that usually comes to mind when he's out of work in this situation, when you need to get promoted in limited time, is somebody like Neil Warnock, but he's definitely a manager, not a head coach. I think Sunderland will definitely stay on that head coach route. And you could see somebody like an Alex Neil or Grant McCann, somebody with a bit of experience in League One. I'm not sure it's going to be sort of a box office household name. But again, said on the Raw podcast for the Sunderland Echo as well, I do feel that coaching ability needs to be combined with somebody with a bit of leadership and a bit of strength of character. I like Lee Johnson as a person. I liked a lot of his rhetoric, cutting through some of the jargon. I thought it was impressive. He was clearly a deep thinker about the game, despite the fact that he used to, trip himself up by talking a bit too much. But who hasn't done that? I'm probably doing that now myself. But yeah, I think historically Sunderland needs someone with strength of character. Reid, Poyer, Allardyce, Keane, somebody, who can lift the club, who can set a rocket behind it. But they also have to be a good coach and fit in the model as well. So it's not an easy task by any means, replacing Lee Johnson. And yeah, the work is on now for Christian Speakman and Louis Dreyfus.
Yeah. And obviously we've recorded a podcast straight after the game on Sunday, Michael. And one of the talking points, we discussed was about Lee Johnson and, after a 6-0 defeat, a 5-1 defeat, a 4-0 defeat, some heavy defeats this season. And like I said then, some of the worst defeats we've ever had, probably as a club, all coming in the same season. And we were all saying, should he probably get the season? I still think Lee Johnson would have been our best chance of promotion as head coach. He knows the players know him. Obviously, we don't know what's happened in the changing room, if anything has happened at all. But he has been sacked, and it's a very strange one to kind of comprehend. Like I said to James, the timing of it just before deadline day, it wasn't expected at all.
The timing certainly was the thing that was the most surprising to me about this, because I think when we recorded that podcast, and obviously when I was busy watching, I think it was at the Sunday show on Fan TV, I wasn't expecting anything, and then boom, the announcement comes that he's gone. I think I was firmly in the lead. To speak my own thoughts on Lee Johnson, I was firmly in the Lee Johnson in camp, certainly before Bolton, and I would be lying if I said Bolton changed me completely to Lee Johnson out. It put me on the fence to the point where if he did lose his job, I wouldn't be particularly devastated. And I do say that, and again, that is someone who likes Lee Johnson a lot. But as you've alluded to earlier, in the same season, we've been battered 4-0 away from home, 5-1 away from home, 3-0 away from home, 6-0 away from home. And for a team that wants to get into the top two, that isn't good enough. You can't go across the season conceding the amount of goals that we've conceding and expect to finish in the top two. And I do get what you're saying, that in some ways that with the familiarity between Lee Johnson and the players would, in theory, give us the best chance of promotion. I actually don't think that would have been the case because, I mean, if you look at it this way, how many games could you see us winning away from home between now and the end of the season? What's to say that under Johnson, I would not have been surprised if we'd gone to Wigan, for example, which is probably the biggest away game of the season, and lose 5-0. That's just how it's always one extreme or the other with Johnson, and we can't afford that. So for me, whoever comes in has got to sort out the away form. The home form's not, like I said on Sunday, the home form's not the problem. We've been solid at home. Aside from Lincoln, I think that was the only really bad performance, but we've been very good at home for the most part. But away from home, we've had 4 hammerings in the same season. Our goal differences took a turn for the worst. And I'm pretty sure we said this on Sunday as well, that our goal difference is obviously a lot worse than Rotherham's. I think Rotherham only got twice as much the goal difference we have. Wigan probably not far behind Rotherham in terms of goal difference. And goals conceded is even worse because I think we've conceded over twice the amount of goals, or at least nearly twice the amount of goals that Rotherham have. That is not acceptable for a team that wants to finish in the top 2. And Saturday just completely compounded it. And we'll get onto the signings later, but especially with Jay Matete, sorry, I keep saying Matete for some reason. But he's someone that arguably fits the boxes and what we need, that we get overran far too much away from home. And Johnson's biggest issue for me away from home was that he wasn't pragmatic enough. He seemed to think, oh, it's all right. Well, Sunderland will go and absolutely out-football everybody. And in certain away games, you may be able to get away with that if the opposition's really, really not very good. But Bolton, even though I still think we should be losing to them if we want to go up in the top 2, they're not a bad team. We saw that at the stadium ourselves. And I think that system, that game to change to a back 4 was almost suicidal in a lot of ways. So I like Johnson a lot. He's probably the one in League One I've had the most amount of attachment towards as a head coach or a manager. But I don't think he can complain too much when he's been hammered 4 times in the same season, all of which arguably are some of the worst results in Sunderland's history.
Yeah. And I was looking at the win ratios of managers, Ethan, and I think Jack Ross marginally had a better win ratio than Lee Johnson did. But it's fair to say we played the best football we've played in League One under Lee Johnson. But we definitely also played the worst football under Lee Johnson.
Yeah, definitely. I think I fully respect sort of Lee Johnson's football and philosophy and sort of the adage of live by the sword, die by the sword. He will go out, whether it's home or away, whoever we're against. and try and maintain his footballing philosophy and try and play a nice style of football in a high pressing game. But I think that you've got to have a bit more nuance about you in League One. Like, I think the Bolton game's a perfect example. If you don't set up in the correct way and set up on a match-to-match basis, there's every likelihood that you are going to get turned over at some point by teams in this league, because it's inevitably good for the fans to watch a better style of football. But if you're leaving yourself exposed, then there are going to be the odd occasion, which has been proven this season, where you are going to get turned over. So I think that's where he's let himself down. Because personally, since we've dropped down the leagues, I've enjoyed going to watch us under Johnson the most because of the more attacking philosophy. Whereas compared to Jack Ross, it was much more defensive and conservative. But then you are going to leave yourself exposed. So I was firmly in with Lee Johnson until the rest of the season, but you can't beat 6-0 off Bolton and expect nothing to come of it, really.
Yeah. Well, Louis Dreyfus was on TalkSport this morning, James, and he's come out and said that the sacking of Johnson wasn't essentially because of a 6-0 defeat against Bolton. It was accumulation of things. What them things are, I'm not sure yet. The process for new manager began this morning, and apparently there's been a lot of interest in the job, as there probably always is. And there's people questioning the appointment that Sunderland do bring in next, as to whether it's a long-term appointment that we do try and see out for 3-4 seasons and hope it gets us somewhere, or do we just need someone to literally come in now, get us promoted at the end of the season, and then assess the position again?
A very good question, to be honest. I would prefer a long-term appointment, and I think that's what the club will opt for, to be honest, because that's the model the club's moving towards, is sustainability and trying to look at things in cycles. But that is a bit at odds with the get promoted at all costs. But as I say, whoever it is has to fit the head coach role. I suspect that the plan for Lee Johnson was for him to get us up at the Championship, give him a crack in his first season in the Championship, and then sort of reassess from there and move on. I think you need different managers for different cycles, and certain managers are good at certain things, certain tasks in certain leagues, and there's nothing wrong with moving on. But yeah, it's a very tough one. It's almost like stick or twist, and it feels like a big moment in Speakman's tenure and in Louis Dreyfus's tenure, his short tenure as Sunderland owner, that he needs to address, and he ultimately needs to get right as well. But one thing I will say on Lee Johnson as well, just on his football, that was very good at times. But I think, as ever with Sunderland, there's certain things have let him down in terms of the pitch has been terrible. It hasn't affected the home form too much, but it's still fine margins in football, and that should never be happening at a club the size of Sunderland. That needs addressing immediately. And then from that branching upwards, you have to wonder, why is the pitch like that? And then it all leads back to the ownership question again, which is a question that still remains unanswered. That bothers some fans. It doesn't bother other fans, and then you end up in this sort of culture war. There's nothing wrong with holding the differences of opinion. Personally, for me, it bothers me, and I think it's a question that needs addressing. We understand that Louis Dreyfus can't talk about it at the moment for whatever reason and whatever legal reason. I suspect he wants to update fans on that, but again, that's a key question that needs answering soon. And I think, for all the goodwill and the structure changes and the investment behind the scenes, I do think that particular issue is hampering Sunderland a little bit. How much, we don't know. Depending on who you speak to, they'll tell you different things, and people have different opinions on it. But the ownership question needs answering, and I think that has made it a little bit harder for Lee Johnson. I think it's just basic logic. That's not taken away from any of the mistakes he's made himself, because he has made a few mistakes. I think the decision to go from a back five to a back four again has cost him in the end. And obviously some of his defensive coaching. But as ever with all of this stuff, it's an amalgamation of different factors, and it's hard to pin just on one person, albeit, Lee Johnson has to take the lion's share of the blame for him getting the sack, because ultimately proved, not good enough. But there's also, you've got to look at the players, their performances, the coaching staff will have to look at their performances. And ultimately the ownership have to look at their role in it as well, and the role of that question which surrounds the club has played, because it's a collective failure.
Yeah, And obviously there was talk about the pitch getting replaced for, I think it was £500,000, James, and it, to me, never looked like it did. And there are going to be questions about the ownership. And just moving on from, obviously, the manager, I think the one thing that we can all agree on under the whatever ownership or whoever's making the decisions is how much the recruitment's improved.
Yeah, I think it has improved, and as I say, it's really good that Sunderland are recruiting with a clear sort of blueprint in mind. So they're looking at young players from Premier League academies. Can they improve them? Players that have lost their way a little bit. Brian Clough used to do it on a different scale, and Peter Taylor, they used to sign talented players who maybe had lost their way back in the day, and they used to improve them. Patrick Roberts certainly lost his way a little bit. Jack Clark hasn't played for a while. But, it's all good recruiting these young attackers and number 10s, but I think Sunderland needed experience. They've got that with Jermaine Defoe, needed a midfielder. They've got that with Matete. Probably still could have done with a defender for me. I know Tom Flanagan's left. Yeah. We'll possibly get onto that, but I think it is really positive to see that Sunderland are recruiting with specifics in mind. They're not spending a lot of money. They're trying to do it cleverly, which is admirable. But yeah, it's a big departure from how Sunderland used to do it. If you cast your mind back to the Defanti times and whatnot, Sunderland seemed to be in the pockets of agents. To me, it seemed to be always a question of who can we get quickly, who's going to come, and who can we sort of appease the fans with. It was always sticking plasters at Sunderland, and I know we've signed a lot of loan deals again, which isn't ideal, but you sort of have to do in League One, and you see clubs up and down the pyramid sort of utilising that system. But it's a massive departure from what it used to be like, and I think it has progressed in a positive way. But with everything, the proof's in the pudding as well, and you can't really judge it and deem it as a success unless Sunderland get promoted. Despite bringing Dan Neil through and bringing Elliot Embleton through, I don't think anybody would argue against that being the right thing to do, because it is.
Yeah.
Two great stories surrounding Sunderland. But ultimately, if they don't get promoted, this season, it's. Can you say that's been the right decision? I would personally still say yes, but there'd be plenty saying no. But yeah, I mean, it's just everything hinges on promotion, doesn't it? And what I will say as well, and I said this, got this from, said this on the stream last night and picked it up from a point somebody made on the Wise Men Say podcast, was that whoever the manager is sort of comes in and he's got a free hit, because we're probably not going to finish outside of the playoffs. But it's looking unlikely that we'll finish in the top two. So the manager coming in sort of got a free hit, really, because he performs a miracle if he gets us up automatically. And unless it's an absolute disaster, he's probably got a shot in the playoffs as well. So it's an interesting one from a managerial perspective or a head coach's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get on to the transfers now, Michael, and we'll start with the outgoings. Obviously, off the top of my head, I'm probably going to miss one, but obviously Denver Hume left the club. Aidan O'Brien left the club this window. Ollie Younger, Frederick Alves was recalled. Josh Hawkes left the club. And I think that is all of the ones that did leave the club. Tom Flanagan as well, yeah.
Literally Jack Diamond's gone back out, I think, as well.
Jack Diamond on loan as well, yeah. Obviously, Anthony Patterson was talks about him going back out on loan, but with Lee Burge and his, I think it's heart palpitations, he has stayed at the club. But that's now, I think that's 3, possibly 4 defenders left the club, Michael. And obviously Danny Bart came in. There was talks about Congolo, Terence Congolo of Fulham. I think he is now obviously formerly of Huddersfield, former Premier League player, Championship player, highly rated at one point. There was talks about him coming in. Apparently he did reject us, so that deal did kind of die in the water. But if I was to look at one negative from the transfer window, and I mean this is probably the only negative, is the fact that we've let 2 centre-halves go, well, essentially 3 centre-halves go, only brought 1 in, which now leaves us with just 4. And going on the assumption, and it is a strong assumption because obviously we don't know who's going to come in as head coach, we could and probably will play a back 3. We have 1 injury away, left back to Dennis Serkin or to Bailey Wright or to Callum Doyle, to being back to shoehorning players out of position again.
Yeah, that's the thing that was always a concern to me. Obviously, we can still get free agents, but the concern is they're free agents and they won't have played much football. Obviously, they will have tried to keep themselves fit, but they won't have had a club or players to train under. It's training is completely different to just doing solo work. Whereas I would have liked to have seen 1 more centre back, even if we'd got another centre back. I think you would have been able to at least say you've covered yourself in more positions. But as you said, as centre-backs, we've got, what is it, Bart, we've got Wright, Doyle and Jamali.
Yeah.
And obviously Jamali we were looking to loan out, but at this point we're probably going to have to use him, whether he's ready or not. We're going to have to try and get minutes into him so to give him the chance. And we don't know how good he is. We don't know whether he's got anything hidden any good hidden qualities we don't possess. But that is, like you said, that's the one negative of the window, where I think going forward, we've ended the window going forward with what I would say on paper is the best forward options in the league by some distance. I would even go as far to say, but defensively that is the concern. And obviously, when our biggest setback this season has been goals against, and we've let in far too many for a team that we've let in probably at least 15, 20 goals too many for me, for a team that wants to get up into the top two, to have not got another centre back in and leave ourselves short is a little bit concerning. But I wonder whether, and this was doing the rounds on social media as well, I do wonder whether the thought process was, well, O'Nien can play centre back. Well, Gooch can play left back. So maybe we're banking on Huggins and Gooch and O'Nien. Huggins and O'Nien. Maybe we're banking on them coming back from injury and being able to slot into those positions, and then Gooch slotting into left back or left wing back. Which, to be fair, you could argue is a valid one considering the other attacking winger options we've got. So, but I agree with you. The one negative is that defensively we've left ourselves a bit short when I didn't feel we needed to.
Yeah. And obviously, with Flanagan leaving, Ethan, he's a player that's been here, since day one in League One, I think it is. And, he went through a very good patch of form this season and was probably, during that spell, our best defender. But one of the points that people make on Twitter, and, people always have different opinions on it, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. But one thing that I've seen people say is, we're getting rid of the players now that have failed 4 times in a row. And obviously Flanagan was one of them that's been here since day one. And in fairness, I don't think he's been the greatest defender since he came in. Obviously, he had a good, 3, 4, possibly 5 months this season, kind of fell off the form a little bit again. And then obviously it's led to him going out to Shrewsbury on a permanent deal. Is it right to let someone like Tom Flanagan leave? He knows the league, he knows the club. He's been, probably one of our, one of the players that's played the most minutes this season, I'd imagine. Is it right to let him leave on deadline day?
I think that letting him go in January is a risk. He does have, as you say, proven experience in and around this level, and he has shown good patches of form for us. But I think personally, if I was in that side, when I've watched him, I have little to no confidence in him anymore. I think in the back of his head, sometimes I think, as you say, about he has had exposed failures. And I think when I watch him play, I think sometimes he's got it in the back of his head. I think he's too worried about making a mistake, especially at home. I think when I've watched him, when he has the ball, I don't think he looks comfortable on the ball. And he has had good patches of form, as you say. He's tall, he's good in the air, like he's long limbed, good tackler, a good blocker. But I think that especially if we're going to play a 3 at the back and you're leaving yourself exposed to a slightly higher press, I think that you've got someone like Doyle who's very tidy on the ball. And personally, when I've watched us, when Flanagan gets the ball, I think his first instinct is just to try and lump it forward and get rid of it like a hot potato. And I think they've made the right decision by sort of cutting the losses, accepting that we are going to leave ourselves slightly short. But I think that while we can and look for other options, but I agree with the decision to let him go. I personally think that his best performances at Stadium Light is well past him.
Yeah. Well, one of the transfers that obviously came into the club, James, was one that was pretty much rumoured since the start of the window. And I don't think anyone really knew when it was going to happen. Obviously, he was a free agent, just left Rangers. But today actually, at 1 o'clock in the morning, it was announced that it was a done deal. Although I think, there was murmurs of it being done for hours and hours before it actually said it was confirmed. But Jermaine Defoe signing, and from an outside point of view, fans may not get the fact that how big of a signing a 39-year-old coming on 40-year-old striker can be for Sunderland. And it's not just on the pitch, it's not just the experience. You could probably name 100 reasons as to why Jermaine Defoe is an excellent signing at this level for Sunderland.
Yeah, definitely. I think first and foremost, he can still definitely contribute as well. He wasn't getting the game time at Rangers. They've got some excellent forwards, Roof and Morelos are no slouches. They're both young. He wants to play. He still feels he's got goals in his legs. He's contributed at Rangers as well. They absolutely love him up there. He's a bit of a cult figure. The last thing to sort of go in a player is his know-how and his finishing. I think if I'm a League One defender and I see Defoe starting or coming on, I'm thinking, oh my God. If I'm a goalkeeper, I'm thinking I'm going to have to be really on my game here because this man has got a great footballing brain. He can finish from anywhere. And it's you might see him drop back a bit as well. Obviously, he's known as a goal scorer, but he's got the wherewithal and the know-how with the experience as well to probably play a pass at this level as well. So I think his age is kind of irrelevant because he's kept himself in such good shape. And the comparison is to another ex-Sunderland legend as well, and that's Kevin Phillips because he was still contributing in the Championship. I think the last kick of his career sent Palace up into the Premier League with a penalty. He held Blackpool as well, West Brom, Birmingham, Leicester City. He wasn't getting the same goals as he did up Sunderland, but he was still contributing. So I don't think there's any reason Defoe can't contribute for Sunderland. Sunderland were desperate for experience, and Defoe certainly brings a wealth of that at higher levels as well. I mean, he was scored at World Cups, being involved with England squads, and he's an incredible footballer and an incredible person as well. He's got a connection with the club. We all know about Bradley Lowry, and he wanted to come back. Us Sunderland fans don't usually get what we want. We don't usually get nice things, and we've got one here. So I think let's just enjoy it. I think it probably will play on Saturday. That atmosphere is going to be unbelievable.
I was going to say it'll be electric on Saturday with the.
Yeah, I can't wait for the team. Yeah, I can't wait for the team sheet for him to be announced. It's going to be great. It's a signing that makes sense for me, and it's a signing that needed doing, especially if he was going to go to somewhere like Oxford United and play there. It was just like a complete no-brainer. Obviously a really easy one to sell for fans, but I don't actually think that's the motivation behind this. I don't think appeasing fans is the motivation behind the signing. I think the motivation behind the signing is that it makes sense on all fronts. Fan reaction is one of them, but I think it makes sense in a footballing perspective as well.
Yeah,
I think that one of the points that James touched on, I think that a lot of people, well, not a lot to be fair, some people have dismissed this as a bit of a sentimental signing, and while to a degree that obviously is the case, I disagree with it wholeheartedly. Because if you look at it, we needed another striker. The way we play has the ball on the deck rather than having the ball hoofed to him. And Jermaine Defoe, albeit it was a few years younger at this point, when he played for us last time, he was playing in a team that barely created any chances for him. A lot of the time, he had to make his own goals pretty much with his positioning or with his running or his ball retention or whatever it was. This time, he's in a league where he's going to be up against less good defenders, like much less quality opposition, and he's going to get chances often on a plate because he's got the service out wide, whether Patrick Roberts, Jack Clark, Diaku, or Pritchard or Embleton O'Neill behind him. I think there's a lot of reasons to suggest this will be a very, very good signing. And like James said, if you say he's coming off the bench, opposition players are going to brick or shit themselves rather if they've had to deal with Ross Stewart all game, and then they've got Jermaine Defoe to add into the mix. So going forward, especially with Jermaine Defoe, and if Broadhead can come back and we can avoid Stewart getting injured, which is the big if, because our luck with injuries is horrendous at the best of times. But that for me, Stewart and Defoe he should easily be the best strike force in the division, without a doubt.
Yeah, and obviously, Defoe, Dan, is a player that obviously all the fans know well. All the fans love him. He scored goals at pretty much every club I think he's been at. I think in terms of his goals per minute at Bournemouth when he left us originally, I don't think he played too much, but he still scored goals there. And people say he's 39 years old, or he's coming on 40. Can he still do it? Is he still fit enough? Can he play every game? Probably not. But the one point I would raise is look at Akinfenwa at Wycombe, and I would bet me bottom dollar that Defoe is somewhat fitter than Akinfenwa is.
Absolutely. Defoe's just come from Rangers. His contract ended at the start of January with Rangers, so he was coming off being fit anyway, playing for Rangers. And you look at the caliber of goals he scored for Rangers, especially that 300th goal. At the age that he is, being able to have the composure and the technique to be able to finish on a half volley. It's like learning to ride a bike for him. He's what 750 over 750 appearances domestically. He's the 7th Premier League all-time goal scorer. So it'll be a natural instinct to him now scoring goals. He'll know exactly where to put his body, where to throw himself, where to position his run, etc. So we're getting someone who knows the game like it's absolutely nothing. And KLD has just been on TalkSport, which I just listened to. And one of the big factors that he said for the reason behind Jermaine Defoe was the leadership that he can bring as well, because we've got some class talent in the youth ranks, especially what's his name that just got loaned out, Stephen Wern. Yeah. So if we've got Defoe in the ranks, especially potentially even moving into a coaching role after the season, or when he comes back from his loan, to teach these young players and even the players that we've got now, like Ross Stewart, how to play. Because don't forget, back in Tottenham, it used to be a Peter Crouch and Jermaine Defoe partnership. So if we've got a tall striker, Jermaine Defoe knows that exactly how to play that and what to do. So if we've got those two up front, his experience will be invaluable to the young players, to the old players, to the current players, even to the management team that whoever we decide to bring in, to be able to communicate and just act as that sort of middle ground would be sensational for us.
Yeah. And there was talks about Sunderland, being in talks as well, with another striker. I'm not sure on the name at this point, but they kind of pulled the plug on that on Sunday when Defoe agreed a deal, which could have been any time during the day, to be honest, because it was rumoured for so long. But obviously they chose to bring Defoe in, and like I was saying to James, Ethan, there's just so many reasons for Jermaine Defoe to come to a club like Sunderland and have a positive effect. You see what he did with Madja, the finishing drills that he used to do with Madja and Azoro, that paid off for Madja. His experience, obviously, he's never been a player that has come to a team to get promoted or to get out of a division. But, his experience with playing with other players, under managers, he's been there, he's done it all. There wasn't a single reason for Sunderland not to make the signing, unlike Lee Johnson tried to say.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on the reason why Johnson was clearly attempting to, had reservations. I was attempting to block the move, but I think it makes sense on all fronts. I don't think that it's been done to appease the fans or just as fan service, because it does make sense. We do, especially with Broadhead's injury, we are lacking for options up front, and we don't want to have another case of, like we did with Charlie White, just constantly relying on his goals, because if Ross Stewart picks up a knock, even if it's for a couple of games, we are going to seriously struggle for goals. So I think purely from a squad perspective, we did need another striker. And I think, as we said before, I personally think there's no reason why Stewart and Defoe, not that Defoe is going to start every game or play much, but if I was a League One defender and as we said before, I was playing against Ross Stewart and then saw Jermaine Defoe was coming on, against Ross Stewart and Jermaine Defoe, I'd be very, very scared to play against those two in this division, especially with, I was watching it earlier, I watched a compilation of all of his Sunderland goals, and I think most, if not all, were within sort of like the 12-yard radius towards the goal. So he's got an innate ability to finish. And with the creative players that we do have, and hopefully we continue to play more of an attacking style of play, I could, not to get carried away, but I could see Defoe pushing towards the 10-goal mark by the end of the season if we continue to play the attacking style of play and utilising the creative players that we've already got, as well as, the likes of Jack Clark and Roberts coming in. I think that it makes sense on all fronts, and I'm extremely excited to hopefully see him bag a few by the end of the season.
Yeah. And obviously Jermaine Defoe wasn't the only signing we made yesterday, Michael, believe it or not. Jay Matete or Matet, or however the hell you say his name, I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. But he joined from Fleetwood. I think he was on loan at Grimsby possibly last season. Impressed there. And I think might have been early this week. there was I'm not sure on exactly what page it was. It was some kind of VFL page, kind of posted his stats from the games that he's played and why Championship clubs should be taking a gamble on him. And I think it off the top of my head, I can't think of the lad's name. The Fleetwood YouTuber, I think it's Cod Vlogs. He posted a video on this player that I'm not going to say because I don't want to get his name wrong again. And just highlighting his strengths. He can run forward with the ball. He can put challenges in. He can score goals. I'm sure you've all seen the goal that he scored for Grimsby, where he kind of picks the ball up halfway, just drives forward with the ball. No hesitation, just sticks at top corner. And that is something we've really missed for years and years and years. Not just League One, just probably since Sessegnon.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's just controlling things from the middle of the park, isn't it? And it's one, like I said, we touched on earlier with the waveform, especially under Lee Johnson. One of the reasons that we probably haven't done as well away from home was that we've got overran a lot in midfield, and we've been over. The opposition's flooded the midfield, which has overwhelmed us and forced us to make mistakes. So Matete, obviously, I think he's 20 years old, but I think I've actually, funny enough, I think it's the account called 4C a Ball, which was the 30th of January. That was the person who put up the stat about Matete, and apparently they were saying that if you look at all the stats, I think it's like his defensive stats is aerial duels success rate, defensive duels and success rate, successful defensive actions are all around about at worst the 60-70% mark or 50-60% mark. There's a lot of stats there. Obviously, I'm imagining that's coming from someone who watches him every week or someone who knows what it's about, and that sort of signing, I think, could actually be a key difference. Obviously, he's 20 years old. We are going to expect him to have games where he's probably not going to be on it, but that could be just as important, arguably more important than the Defoe signing.
Yeah, and we've made, I think, 6 signings. I think it is in the window, possibly 7. Off the top of my head, I can't really decipher which number it is, but
I think it is 6. Yeah, 6.
And at the start of the window, I said, you'll be looking at bringing 6 or 7 players in, and it's fair to say a lot of people said that was never going to happen. And people were saying, no, we'll bring in 1 or 2 and we'll go from there. But we have brought in 6 signings, Dan. Obviously, a right back in Hume, a centre back, which we've been missing. Kind of a no-nonsense centre back in Danny Bart, who loves a diving header as well, it seems. Matete as a midfielder, a position that we've been short in, all season. Some more attacking depth, Roberts coming in, Clark coming in positions that obviously McGeady is injured at the moment, but when he's played, he hasn't been on form. Lyndon Gooch, I'm sure we've given our opinions enough on Lyndon Gooch's season, but he's not having a particularly good one. We are signing players in positions that we need to. And in previous years, it's never been like that. We've just seen a player on the market that's available and thought, yes, we'll get him. He's another number to add to the squad. And, it's like the Declan John, Callum McFadzean, Joel Lynch, the list could go on and I could talk about an hour for these, but the recruitment, the analysts, everything's changed and it's such a positive thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible thing to see because at the start of the season, our squad, we were all happy with it. We've seen some really good players come through, especially like the likes of Elliot Embleton, Carl Winchester, that have stepped up a lot this season. But the thing is, we've always had the same group of players that we know that they'll put a 7 out of 10 in, but there was never anyone that could give them any competition to push their game to a 9 out of 10 or a consistent 10 out of 10. We always could predict the team sheet every week. There was no one that would really challenge, which is what's so good about this January transfer window because, like we said at the start of the window, we needed these players to even just give a bit of competition because, say, Lyndon Gooch constantly getting in the starting 11 but is very stale because he's had no competition from any other players. But now that we've brought in a couple of players that can play his positions, fullback in Trey Hume, and then the wingers as well, Josh Clark and Patrick Roberts, they're 3 quality players. And from what I saw, Josh Clark's brief cameo against Bolton, he seemed very, very promising, even though we were getting battered. it was like a little bit of hope that I saw from him. So to be able to, for KLD to decide that what we've got is actually not good enough to be able to challenge for automatics, and to invest how he does, and Christian Speakman as well, the quality that he's decided to bring in, because let's not forget he's the one that's in charge of transfers. It wasn't Lee Johnson, because he was only the head coach. So the recruitment team, the managers, etc., they've had a blinder this transfer window, and it's really given the competition to the players that felt that they were undroppable, which is incredible. And then obviously the seventh signing will be the manager. So if we nail that seventh signing and get a perfect manager in, I think we could actually start to repeat and continue to destroy teams like we were doing a month ago, without dropping off and still having the quality of players that, should we pick up injuries, we know we've got the quality on the bench and quality in the reserves, etc., to be able to call upon and know that they'll do a solid job.
Yeah. Last but not least, Ethan, I'll start with you. Plenty of outgoings, plenty of incomings. How would you rate the window out of 10 for Sunderland?
I would have said probably good 9.5. But the only draw, I think we've made some brilliant acquisitions in key areas which we needed to improve. Like we were saying about Matete as sort of a holding midfielder, and then Bart as a sort of a no-nonsense centre half, obviously Defoe, and then some creativity out wide. But the only worry for me, with a sceptical hat on, is that we've let Flanagan go. And not that I'm Flanagan's biggest fan, as I said before, but it purely on a numbers basis as we go on sort of the crunch time of the season. So I'd give it 8 out of 10 purely on the basis of we haven't replaced the number that we've lost. Not that we haven't replaced Flanagan's quality, but the purely on a squad basis that we haven't brought in another centre half, just to be on the safe side.
Yeah. Michael, how would you rate it?
I'd have said 9, possibly close to a 10, had we brought in, say, Congolo, or we brought in another good centre half just to cover for the fact we've lost with Flanagan. But I would still probably go with a strong 8, just because of the numbers we brought in, and on paper, certainly attacking. We've had an exceptional window when you bring in like players that you never, at the start of the month, I think even before Defoe left Rangers, I didn't see us getting Defoe in at that point, although I did call a couple of weeks ago that we would get Defoe, so I'm claiming that. You get that. Patrick Roberts, never in a million years did I imagine before we were linked with him we would get him in League One. And Jack Clark as well, that's another good one. Mateta looks like, hopefully, if he's as any good as we've been led to believe, obviously we have to watch him play, then hopefully he'll help out our midfield a lot. Danny Bart as well, in a position we desperately need strengthening in. You know, I think I would say a good strong 8, but would have been higher had we got a good centre back in to replace Flanagan.
Yeah, last but not least, Dan.
Yeah, I can't disagree with what's been said. It has to be a very solid high 8 with the quality that we brought in. Yeah, we're lacking a centre back, but I think the real big decision lays on who KLD will bring in as a managerial appointment, because that alone could push the transfer window to a 10. Because if we've brought all these quality players in, and we've got the right manager to get them to perform to the best of their abilities, then I think we could push on and really challenge at the top level of this league. So I think at the moment a strong 8. Yeah, we might have could have done with a centre back to just give a bit of support to the others, should any injuries etc. go on. But it all relies on this managerial appointment, I think. And like KLD said, he's had interest from all over the world. And he's not going to rush into the decision. He'll just make it when it's time to. So he doesn't seem too worried about that. So it makes me think that we are going to get someone who will do the job to the best that we need them to. So
yeah, hopefully so. We'll see about that. Don't know whether he'll be in by Saturday, possibly. Although I have slight doubts, but never know with Sunderland. They never do what is expected. But that is all the time we have for today. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure that 6-0 defeat against Bolton has been quickly forgotten about for now, at least. Hopefully we can go and get back on track on Saturday against Doncaster. Like we said, at the weekend, we will be back to talk about that game on Sunday. But until then, we will see you later.
That's all, folks.